15 minutes before my wedding, I found my parents, hidden behind a pillar on plastic chairs. His mother had filled the front row with senators and investors. She had no idea I owned 23% of her hotel empire. I found them by the service entrance, not because I was looking there, because I had walked the entire length of the Grand Ellison Ballroom, past 200 guests in silk and tailored wool, past white roses arranged by a florist who charged more per stem than most people spent on groceries, past crystal chandeliers that threw light across the room like scattered diamonds, looking for two people who should have been impossible to miss in the front row, and they weren't there. My mother was sitting on a plastic chair, the folding kind, white, utilitarian, the kind venues stack in the back hallway and bring out when the real seating runs short. She had her hands folded in her lap and her best dress on, the navy one she'd bought at Nordstrom Rack 3 months ago and had dry cleaned twice because she wanted it to be perfect, and she was sitting beside a marble pillar that blocked her view of the altar and most of the room. My father sat next to her with his eyes on the floor. Behind them, stacked catering trays caught the light from an emergency exit sign that glowed red above their heads. My mother saw my face change before I said anything. She had always been able to do that, read me before I'd decided what I was expressing. It was the specific attunement of someone who had spent 31 years paying close attention to another person. Don't spoil your day, sweetheart. Her smile trembled at the edges, not because she was going to cry, because she was working very hard not to. My father didn't look up. He had the expression of a man absorbing a humiliation he had decided to carry quietly so that I wouldn't have to. I stood there in my wedding gown, Vera Wang, ivory silk, the dress I had tried on 6 times before saying yes to it, with my veil pinned and my flowers in my hands, and 15 minutes until I was supposed to walk down an aisle, and I felt something happen in my chest that was not sadness and was not anger. It was colder than both of those. It was clarity. Let me tell you who my parents are, because they matter more than anything else in this story, and I need you to understand them before I tell you the rest. My father, Thomas Ellery, owns a hardware store in Millbrook, Connecticut. Ellery Hardware. He opened it when he was 26 with a small business loan and 30 years of accumulated practical knowledge, and he has run it for 35 years with the specific dignity of someone who has decided that doing one thing very well for a very long time is its own kind of excellence. He can tell you the load-bearing capacity of any fastener in his inventory. He knows his customers by name and by project. He knows that the Hendersons are finishing a deck and that Mrs. Park is finally replacing the kitchen cabinets she's been planning for 3 years. He works 6 days a week and has never once complained about it in my presence. My mother, Linda Ellery, taught 3rd grade for 28 years. She retired last spring, and the card her students' parents sent was 32 pages long. She made my Halloween costumes by hand every year until I told her, at 14, that I was too old for homemade costumes, a declaration I regret and have told her so. She reads 2 books a week. She grows tomatoes in the backyard that are, objectively, the best tomatoes I have ever eaten. She has never in my life made me feel like anything other than the most important person in whatever room we shared. These are my parents. Preston's mother, Cynthia Vale, had described them, at a dinner in November, as charming in a very regional way. She had said it to Preston, not to me, in the conversation I was clearly not supposed to overhear from the kitchen doorway of their Riverside Drive townhouse, where I had gone to refill my wine and had stood for 4 seconds longer than she'd expected. I had gone back to the table and sat down and said nothing. That was the 3rd time I had said nothing. I was keeping count by then, which should have told me something. My name is Claire Ellery. I am 31 years old. I am the majority managing partner of Ellery Capital Holdings, which I built from a seed fund I started at 24 with $40,000 in savings, a borrowed desk in a shared office space in Midtown, and an understanding of distressed asset acquisition that my finance professors at Wharton had described as unusually intuitive and that I would describe as the product of watching my father run a business on thin margins for my entire childhood and learning very early to understand where value actually lived versus where people thought it lived. The firm managed $2.3 billion in assets as of last December. I had not told Preston's family this. I had told Preston. I had given him the full picture during our 3rd month of dating. In the specific direct way I approached anything that seemed important, clearly with documentation available if he wanted it. He had nodded and said he was impressed and changed the subject, which I had interpreted as either discomfort with the scale of it or characteristic Vale family discretion about discussing money openly. I had been wrong about which one it was, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I met Preston Vale at a charity gala in March of last year, the Meridian Foundation dinner, which I attended because one of my portfolio companies was a sponsor, and I felt the obligation of physical presence at these things when the check was large enough. He was across the room, tall, dark-suited, with the specific ease of someone who has attended so many of these events that he has stopped performing ease and has simply become easy. He made his way to me with the directness of someone who had decided to introduce himself before he finished thinking about it, which I found attractive. You look like you're calculating the room's net worth, he said. I'm calculating whether the catering budget is proportional to the ticket price, I said. It isn't. He laughed. We talked for 2 hours. He was smart in the conversational way. Quick, interested, good at asking questions and listening to the answers. He was also, I learned over the following weeks, genuinely funny, intermittently kind, and possessed of the specific charm that comes from being raised to be charming, which is both a skill and, I would eventually understand, a tool. His family was the Vale family, as in Vale Meridian Hotels, 47 properties across North America and Europe, 3 generations of accumulated prestige, and the specific social confidence of people who have been in rooms that mattered for long enough that they've stopped noticing the rooms. Cynthia Vale was the matriarch in the truest sense of the word. 63 years old, diamonds always at her throat, the particular elegance of a woman who has curated herself so carefully and for so long that the curation has become indistinguishable from personality. She ran the family's philanthropic arm, sat on 4 boards, and had I observed over 8 months of Sunday dinners, a flawless social radar for identifying the people in any room who were most worth impressing and the people who were not. My parents were not. I watched her clock them at our first meeting in October, a dinner at the Vale townhouse that had been described as casual and was not casual, and I watched her make the assessment in approximately 4 seconds. Thomas Ellery with his careful blazer and his hardware store hands, Linda Ellery with her Nordstrom rack dress and her genuine, unperformed warmth. Cynthia had been gracious. She had been practiced and polished and exactly as welcoming as someone could be while also communicating through a dozen small signals that the welcome had a ceiling. I noticed the signals. I told myself they were manageable. I was wrong about that too. The first escalation came in November, a dinner at the townhouse, 8 people. The occasion being nothing specific, just the regular gravity of Sunday Vale family dinners, which I had been attending for 4 months, and which had their own internal culture that I was still learning to navigate. Preston's sister Vivienne was there, and Vivienne's husband, and 2 of Cynthia's friends from her philanthropic orbit. My parents had not been invited. This was normal. They hadn't been to these dinners before. The not normal part was Cynthia's comment in the kitchen doorway, the one I wasn't supposed to hear. Charming, in a very regional way. I went back to the table. I said nothing. I told myself it was nothing, that Cynthia was 63 and came from a world with specific social hierarchies that I was sophisticated enough not to be injured by, that she would come to know my parents properly and the assessment would revise itself. The second escalation came in January. Preston and I were looking at venues for the wedding. The Grand Ellison was his family's suggestion. They had held 2 previous Vale family weddings there, and Cynthia had an established relationship with the event director that she described as helpful, and that functioned, in practice, as Cynthia having architectural control over the room. I didn't object to the venue. It was beautiful. I made one request. My parents sit in the front row, I said. That's the only thing I care about for the ceremony. Preston kissed my forehead. Of course, they raised you. I told myself it was handled. The third escalation came in February. Vivienne made a comment about silverware. Specifically, she asked, with the bright curiosity of someone who has practiced making pointed questions sound innocent, whether my family had proper silverware or whether we'd need to borrow from the caterer for the rehearsal dinner. I looked at her for a moment. We have silverware, I said. She smiled. Of course you do. I only meant family heirlooms. The Vale side has some gorgeous pieces going back to my great-grandmother. I wasn't sure if your family had that kind of thing. My great-grandmother's silver was sold during the Depression, I said. So no. An uncomfortable silence. Preston said, Vivienne, can you pass the bread? Subject changed. No acknowledgement, no correction. I folded my napkin in my lap and I felt, below the surface of the dinner conversation, something shift in me that was not dramatic and was not decided but was the beginning of a decision. Not the whole decision, just the beginning. The fourth escalation was in March. My attorney, Daniel Park, JD, 17 years in corporate and family law, the person I trusted most with the legal architecture of my financial life, had been reviewing the prenuptial agreement that the Vale family's attorneys had submitted. He called me on a Thursday morning. Claire, I need you to come in. How bad is it? A pause. It's not bad in the obvious ways. It's bad in the structural ways. The asset transfer clause on page 14. I haven't gotten to page 14 yet. Read page 14, he said, and then come in. Page 14 contained a provision that, in the specific language of estate and matrimonial law, would have required me to transfer majority management of Ellery Capital Holdings into a joint trust structured under Vale family governance terms in the event that Preston and I had children. The clause was buried under 3 layers of subordinate provisions and written in language that was technically accurate and practically impossible to parse without significant legal training. Daniel described it, when I sat in his office on Friday morning, as one of the more elegant attempts at asset acquisition I've seen in a prenuptial context. Who wrote this? I said. The Vale family's lead attorney is Franklin Marsh, 28 years in estate law. Has he done this before? This specific clause structure? I've seen a version of it once. The case was settled out of court. I sat with that. There's something else, Daniel said. He turned his monitor toward me. An email, forwarded to him from an address I didn't recognize, which he explained had come through a secure channel he used for sensitive communications. The email was from Franklin Marsh to Preston, dated 3 weeks earlier. After the wedding, we pressure her to sign the asset transfer. She trusts me. I read it twice. The room was very quiet. There's also a voicemail, Daniel said, left by mistake on my office line. I believe it was intended for a different number. He pressed play. Cynthia Vale's voice, clear and specific. Put her parents somewhere invisible. I will not have hardware store people in my family photos. And then Preston's voice, overlapping. Claire won't fight it. She's too desperate to marry me. I sat in Daniel Park's office for a long moment. My hands were in my lap. They were not shaking. I noticed this specifically. Some information arrives and shakes you, and some arrives and settles you. The way a diagnosis you already suspected on some level settles you. Not because it's good news, but because the uncertainty is over and what's left is just reality. And reality is something you can work with. Daniel, I said. Yes. I need you to tell me exactly what I can legally do. He picked up his legal pad. Let's start from the beginning, he said. What followed was 6 weeks of the most precise professional preparation of my life, which is saying something because I had spent the previous 7 years building a firm from a borrowed desk and $40,000. The Ellery Capital situation first. Ellery Capital Holdings had been, for 14 months, the largest outside investor in Vail Meridian Hotels. This had happened because Vail Meridian had entered a debt crisis in late 2022, over-leveraged covenant-light debt from their expansion phase coming due in an unfavorable rate environment, and their distressed equity had been available at a valuation that my analyst team had flagged as significantly below intrinsic value. We had purchased shares over 6 months, quietly, through 3 different vehicles. By the time Preston proposed, Ellery Capital held 23% of Vail Meridian's outstanding equity. He had not asked what I invested in. I had assumed he knew, in the way that I assumed his family did their due diligence on anyone who entered their orbit. Evidently, they had not looked closely enough, or had looked and underestimated what they were seeing, which was a more interesting error. I had also, in the year preceding the wedding, extended a personal guarantee on Vail Meridian's pending credit facility, a $340 million refinancing that was dependent on demonstrating investor confidence to the lending syndicate. My guarantee, documented and signed, was part of the confidence package the bank's credit committee had required before approving the facility. Without my guarantee, the credit facility needed to be restructured. Without the credit facility, Vail Meridian's debt maturity calendar was a problem. Daniel and my financial team spent 3 weeks modeling the scenarios. Then I called Reginald Okafor, 30 years in corporate finance, former head of restructuring at a major investment bank, currently an independent advisor who I had worked with on 2 previous situations, and who had the specific manner of someone who has seen enough financial crises to understand them as weather rather than catastrophe. What happens to Vail Meridian if the personal guarantee is withdrawn before the credit facility closes? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. The lenders reopen the credit committee review. That takes 4 to 6 weeks minimum. In the current rate environment, the revised terms will be materially worse. Depending on the covenant structure, you might trigger technical default on the existing facility. And if the board and the lenders simultaneously receive documentation of a legal matter involving senior family leadership, a longer pause, that would be a material event requiring disclosure, he said carefully, which would make the existing lender relationship significantly more complicated. How significantly? Claire, what is this about? I told him. He was quiet for a very long time. What do you need from me? He said. The wedding morning was ordinary in all the ways wedding mornings are. My maid of honor, Julia, brought coffee at 7 a.m. The hair and makeup team arrived at 8. My mother sat beside me while my hair was pinned and told me the story of her own wedding morning. The broken zipper, my grandmother's hands shaking while she fixed it. And I listened to her tell it, and I felt the specific fullness of loving a person that you have loved your entire life, the weight of accumulated time together. I had not told her anything. This was deliberate. What I had prepared was going to happen, or it wasn't, and I needed to know first what had actually been done. I needed to see the plastic chairs before I knew for certain. At 1:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the ceremony, I went looking for my parents. I walked the front row first. Cynthia Vail sat dead center, diamonds catching the chandelier light, a champagne flute in her hand. Preston's father to her left, Vivian and her husband, a senator I recognized from the Times, 2 board members I recognized from Vail Meridian's filings, a major donor to 3 of Cynthia's charitable initiatives. The front row contained everyone who mattered to Cynthia. My parents were not there. I walked the room. I checked the second row, the third. I found Julia's parents, Preston's college friends, my colleagues from the firm who had received their invitations and their seat assignments 3 weeks ago. I found my parents at 1:51 p.m. Plastic chairs, service entrance, red exit sign. I looked at my mother's navy dress. I looked at my father's floor. Something in me went still in the way that things go still right before they become very certain. Don't spoil your day, sweetheart, my mother said. I squeezed her hand. Stay here, I said. I'll be back. Preston found me in the antechamber at 1:54. The photographer is waiting. Why are my parents behind a pillar? His face did the flicker. The specific flicker I had been cataloging for 8 months. The half second where the performance lapsed and whatever was underneath it showed through before the composure reassembled. Mom handled seating. It's done. Don't make a scene. He lowered his voice to the register he used when he wanted to signal seriousness without volume. They're not exactly high society, Claire. You know how this works. This is my family's world. Everyone in that room is someone who matters to us. Your parents? Look, they're comfortable. They're fine. Just don't make a scene, I said. Exactly. I looked at him. I thought about page 14. I thought about the voicemail on Daniel's office line. Okay, I said. He exhaled. Good. Come on. The photographer. I'll be right there, I said. He went back into the ballroom. I reached into the hidden pocket sewn into the left seam of my gown. Julia had insisted, when we were discussing the dress, that a wedding gown without pockets was a design failure, and I had agreed for reasons that went beyond her argument, and I took out my phone. I sent one text. Now. I put the phone back. I picked up my flowers. I walked into the Grand Ellison ballroom. The room settled when I appeared at the entrance. 200 people, and the specific collective awareness of a crowd that has been waiting and has now seen what it was waiting for. The music was playing. The string quartet Cynthia had selected, something classical and appropriate and chosen without consulting me, which was fine, which was exactly fine. I walked, not toward Preston, who was at the altar with his best man and his composure and his family in the front row. I walked toward the stage, up the 3 steps onto the raised platform, to the microphone. The music stopped. The room, 200 people, senators and investors and board members and charity chairs and everyone Cynthia Vail had assembled to witness the marriage that was supposed to consolidate whatever she planned, went completely silent. Preston was 12 feet away. His face was doing something complicated. Cynthia, in the front row, had her champagne glass halfway to her mouth and had had stopped there. I looked at the microphone. I looked at the room. Before I say I do, I said, and my voice was even, there are a few things everyone here deserves to know. Preston moved fast, the way people move when the thing they were afraid of starts happening. Claire, a warning, compressed into one syllable. My parents were promised the front row at this ceremony, I said. They are currently seated on plastic chairs behind a pillar near the service entrance. The murmur started at the back and moved forward like a wave. Cynthia set down her champagne glass. She stood. This is a misunderstanding, she said. Her voice was controlled. Of course it was controlled. Cynthia had been managing rooms for 40 years. Then explain it, I said. Preston was on the stage now, 2 steps from the microphone. His face had moved past complicated into pale. You're embarrassing yourself, he said. Low, tight, the voice he used when he was genuinely frightened and was converting the fear into authority. Put it down. We can fix the seating. This is fixable. Then, leaning close enough that the microphone might not pick it up, though I knew it would. My family can ruin yours before dinner. I reached into the hidden pocket. I took out my phone. Play it, I said. Across the ballroom, 3 screens that had been displaying a tasteful slideshow of Preston and me through the years went dark, then bright. Cynthia's voice, and the specific clarity of a voicemail recorded on a high-quality office system, filled the Grand Ellison ballroom. Put her parents somewhere invisible. I will not have hardware store people in my family photos. A gasp moved through the room. The screen changed. Preston's voice. Claire won't fight it. She's too desperate to marry me. The gasps became murmurs, became something louder. Cynthia had sat back down. She was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not fury, not composure, but the specific look of someone watching a situation unfold that they had believed was under their control and is discovering it isn't. The screen changed again. The email. Franklin Marsh to Preston, 3 weeks prior. One line in bold, enlarged for legibility. After the wedding, we pressure her to sign the asset transfer. She trusts me. The ballroom went completely quiet. Not the anticipatory quiet of a crowd waiting for what comes next. The stunned quiet of 200 people processing information that has just substantially revised their understanding of the event they're attending. Preston's hand closed around my wrist. Where did you get those? From the attorney you tried to bribe, I said. My attorney. The one your family's counsel contacted 3 weeks ago to discuss. And I'm quoting the email Franklin Marsh sent. The most efficient way to ensure my cooperation with the asset transfer provision. I looked at Preston directly. Daniel Park has been my attorney for 4 years. He has a conflict of interest policy. He thought you should know. Preston's grip tightened. You cannot do this. Let go of my wrist. Security, specifically 2 members of the Ellison's event security team who Daniel had briefed the night before and who were positioned near the stage for this specific eventuality, moved from their posts. Preston let go. He took 1 step back. His mask, the specific social mask of a veil, the composure and the charm and the practiced ease that I had watched him deploy in every room for 14 months, was gone. Completely gone. In front of 200 people who had known him his entire life, in the room his family had filled with everyone who mattered to them, Preston Vale looked like what he was. A man who had been caught. I turned back to the microphone. For anyone here who doesn't know me well, and I suspect that's more people in this room than I realized, my name is Claire Ellery. I am the majority managing partner of Ellery Capital Holdings. Murmurs. Several people in the room recognized the name. Several more recognized the recognition. Last year, my firm became the largest outside investor in Vail Meridian Hotels after purchasing distressed shares during the company's debt restructuring. We currently hold 23% of outstanding equity. From the 3rd row, Daniel Park stood. He was 51 years old, charcoal suit, a kind of stillness that comes from being in courtrooms and boardrooms for 23 years and understanding that the room usually comes to you if you let it. As of this morning, he said clearly, Ms. Ellery has withdrawn all personal guarantees connected to Vail Meridian's pending credit extension. Copies of the withdrawal documentation, along with the evidence displayed here, have been forwarded to the Vail Meridian Board, the lending syndicate's lead counsel, and the New York State Attorney General's office for review of the prenuptial fraud matter. Cynthia Vale made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The specific, involuntary sound of someone absorbing a financial consequence that is large enough to be physical. Franklin Marsh, who was in the 4th row, was already looking at his phone. Reginald Okafor, who was in the 5th row because I had invited him as my guest and he had come, met my eyes across the room and gave a small, precise nod. Preston was still on the stage. He hadn't moved. He was standing in the specific frozen posture of someone whose next action has not yet arrived because they genuinely do not know what it is. I took the engagement ring off my left hand. I set it on the podium beside the microphone. A quiet, specific sound. Small. Final. This wedding is canceled, I said. The catering is paid for. Dinner will still be served. I recommend the salmon. I looked at the room, at the senators and the board members and the charity chairs and the 200 people who had come to watch Preston Vale marry a woman his family had planned to leverage and had it turned out incorrectly evaluated. Then I looked at the service entrance. My parents were standing in the aisle. My father had his arm around my mother. She had her hand over her mouth. They were looking at me the way parents look at their children when the children have become fully and finally themselves, with a pride that is too large for the room and spills out everywhere. I stepped down from the stage. I walked to them. Come with me, I said. My father took my arm. My mother took my hand. I walked them to the head table. The table where Cynthia Vale had planned to sit. The flowers in the center, the chairs with the silk cushions, the place settings that the florist had told me cost $340 each. I pulled out the center chair for my mother. I held it while she sat. Then I sat down next to her. My father sat on my other side, and he straightened his blazer, and he looked around the Grand Ellison ballroom, the chandeliers and the roses and 200 people in silk and tailored wool, with the expression of a man who has spent 35 years running a hardware store with complete dignity and is now sitting at the best table in the room and finds that this is, perhaps, exactly where he should have been all along. Did you plan all of that? He said quietly. Most of it, I said. The ring on the podium was a nice touch. I thought so. My mother was looking at the room. At Cynthia, who was surrounded by people asking questions she didn't have answers to. At Preston, who was being spoken to by two men I recognized as the Vale family's crisis attorneys, who had apparently been on retainer and had arrived quickly. At Daniel Park, who was calmly providing copies of documents to a third man I recognized as a representative from the AG's office. You knew, my mother said. Not an accusation, just recognition. I found out 6 weeks ago, I said. I needed to know what they'd actually done before I decided what to do about it. She looked at me for a long moment. And the plastic chairs? That was the confirmation, I said. That was me finding out who they actually were. She took my hand. Are you all right? I thought about Preston's voice on the recording. She's too desperate to marry me. I thought about page 14 and the elegant attempt at asset acquisition dressed in matrimonial language. I thought about Cynthia's diamonds and her practiced social radar and the way she had clocked my parents in 4 seconds at that October dinner. I thought about the specific cold clarity I had felt standing in front of two plastic chairs. Yes, I said. Actually, I think I am. The salmon, when it came, was excellent. 6 months later, Vale Meridian Hotels completed a restructured credit facility in August on terms that were, as Reginald had predicted, materially worse than the original. The lending syndicate required enhanced covenants and a higher rate spread. The board underwent a governance review. Cynthia Vale stepped down from her role as chair of the philanthropic arm in June, citing personal reasons.